What's up? Welcome back. Long time no see to Turn Bark Time. Season 2, episode 14. 14. I'm really bad at that one. I'm the Turn.
I'm the Bark.
We're going to be here a long time. Welcome back, everybody. Sorry for the 2-week hiatus. Fun facts over here at the Turner-Wolfendale household. We got a new puppy named Goose, or as I affectionately call him, Goosifer, because he is a little hellion. And so I've needed my rest when I could get it, and I couldn't stay up late. But now, after 2 weeks in, I feel like I could stay up to make this recording. So that's what's going on here. Bark, how you doing?
Well, I'm doing all right. We're getting ready to wrap up the old track season, and the football helmets came back from reconditioning in Mexico, muy rapido. So that was much appreciated. Makes you wonder why it takes so long other years. But I mean, other than that, we're living the dream.
Love it.
Still working on the house we bought. Yeah. Still one step at a time.
I love it. All right, so tonight's topic should be short and sweet, but we always say that, and then the time goes up to 40 minutes. So today's topic actually popped up in the news last week with the House of Representatives passing legislation to make Washington, D.C. a state. So, Barker, you want to take it from there?
So, lay out some groundwork. So when you say, should we make D.C. a state, people will freak out and be like, well, no, I was asking people in the hallway at work. It's kind of what I do now. But people were like, well, no, you can't do that because it's a seat of the federal government. And the seat of the federal government cannot be within a state. And I'm like, so what the bill is saying is to shrink the federal district, right? The federal enclave, fancy word, fancy. To right now, Washington, D.C. is approximately 68 square miles because they gave 32 back to Virginia when they thought that they were going to make slavery go bye-bye, which will come up later. Anyways, they want to shrink it from 68 miles being the federal district to about a 2 miles worth of, space, which would pretty much just encapsulate all of the federal buildings and a lot of the monuments, but then take the rest of what we consider the DC metro area and turn that into a state, right? So it's not turning the whole thing. The federal government would still operate in a federal district outside of a state, but it would allow the people who are living in the other 66 square miles of Washington, D.C., to be treated like everybody else, which is really what the big issue is.
Yeah. So one of the big things, in like Barker referenced, is the goal of when Washington, D.C. was created back in the late 1700s, early 1800s being built, was that no state should hold the national capital. No state should get the honor of holding the national capital. And so land was actually ceded from Virginia and Maryland to do that. And so that's where people like freak out right now. They're like, no, that's like Barker said, that's not where it's at. But facts about this really quick. The smallest state by population currently is Wyoming, and rough numbers out of Wyoming are around 585,000 people. The new census data came out. I do not have an accurate 2020 of what Wyoming population is, but it is the smallest state by population, and I believe it still is. DC, the metro area, holds 700,000 people.
More than Vermont as well.
Yes. So it would actually be, if it became a state, it would be the 49th, because we'd have 51 states. It'd be the 49th state in population. It would actually beat out Vermont and Wyoming in population. And it's crazy because you look at those people that live in that area, they don't have a United States representative, and they don't have a Senate or 2 senators that represent them. Now, they do have a elected member of Congress who cannot vote. And I believe
she can debate.
She can debate, yep, and she can speak her piece for the people of Washington, D.C., but she cannot cast a vote.
Right, and she is the one, her name is Eleanor Holmes Norton. She's represented the district since 1991, I think. So she's been there for a minute. And it's HR, right, House Resolution 51. See what you did there. But the reason for it is that these people pay taxes, and they don't get representation in the nation's capital. And so, like, everybody who teaches the American Revolution knows no taxation without representation was the rallying cry of the American Revolution. It's also what's on the license plates of people who are in DC. And I can't remember who. Bush took it off the car. I think Obama had it on there, and I think it's still on the presidential limo now. But it's kind of like a low-key burn that it's like the seat of where American federal power is has the same flaw in it that caused the revolution to create this new country, right? You have people who are paying into the system. They pay more federal taxes. I think you were saying in like 20 some states.
Yeah, so they pay more in federal taxes than 22 other states. So I mean, like, I get like Wyoming and Vermont, like you can say like, okay, they're smaller states, but 22 other states, they pay more federal taxes than.
And I think the other thing too that a lot of people don't know is that if DC wants to pass a new law for the people who live in DC, there's a council of 12 people and a chairperson, so essentially 13 people who look at the law, and then they have to pass it to Congress. Like, it goes to the House and the Senate. And the disparity, the problem is that DC is predominantly, I think in the last election, 92% of them voted for Biden versus Trump. So it's been I don't think they've ever elected a Republican. So it's a traditionally a Democratic, I guess you'd say, stronghold.
Well, the liberal thinking, like liberal mindset on issues.
Yeah, well, it's an urban area, so yeah. Urban areas tend to lean blue versus red.
Yep.
But they ask for these more liberal policies, and then it has to pass the House of Representatives, which right now is controlled by the Democrats, and the Senate, which is controlled by the Republican Party. So they don't really have the governing body that makes their decisions isn't representative of the population who's asking for the new laws, which again contradicts kind of the foundational like beliefs of the United States that you should have a government of people who represent you, who make decisions for you, where DC, and just the irony that the seat of federal power is the place where people are like the most disenfranchised.
Yep.
And I mean, there's some opposition to it because people obviously if you just look at it we're just looking at it from a non-partisan way, just looking at the letter of the law. There is the problem that the 23rd Amendment gives equal representation in the Electoral College to Washington, D.C. It gives Washington, D.C., or the federal district, it gives them 3 electoral votes, which is why there's 535 voting members of Congress, but there's 538 electoral votes.
Yep.
Because DC gets equal treatment as as the smallest states, Wyoming. The problem is that if you shrink the federal district down to 2 square miles without changing that amendment, theoretically, anybody who's living inside of that, which probably should only be like the president.
Yeah.
Yeah. People who are residing at the White House would have 3 electoral votes. So that's one of the things that people who are against DC statehood bring up. The people who are pushing for DC statehood, they have essentially like an asterisk in there saying like, we fully expect or would fully recommend that the 23rd Amendment, we would make the 28th Amendment that would, ratify or repeal the 23rd Amendment.
Yeah.
Because it would be redundant. It wouldn't need to be there anymore.
Right. And one of the things too is like this upsets the apple cart of power, right? Like when we talk about this, adding a representative to the House of Representatives, you have to take it away from somewhere because there is law that House of Representatives will not grow beyond 435. Like that, it's locked into place. And so obviously you could have a law that could change that. You could bring in one more representative, make it 436, but then you have the ability to tie, and that's not what you want. You want to have a split evenly. And so you'd have to look at that, and you'd have to figure out what state loses a representative there.
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, to get that, because you'd have to do that. And then the other thing, though, is you can give 2 senators easily because there's nothing saying it limits to 100 senators. It's just every state gets 2. We've always had, not always, but we had 50 for the past, 50 some years, 70 some years. That's bad math. Sorry. 70
math is hard.
Yep, 70 some years. My dad was born in 1947. I can do math, I swear. And so when we look at this, we say, like, 2 senators. But when you look at how the Senate plays out, right, we don't ever have that majority in the Senate that's dominant. You have a majority, but you don't have enough for the filibuster. But you look at it, if you add this and you talk about DC being a predominantly liberal, democratic, urban area, all of a sudden those 2 senators become huge in the Senate, right? Because right now we're at we call it a 50-50 split, right? Is what we're at with Kamala breaking the tie. I think is what we're at. Or we at 51, 50, 49. I don't remember.
Right, the Republicans have a slight advantage. I think. I'm fairly confident that they have.
I think we know because the Georgia runoffs made it so that the stuff could get passed in the Senate. So I think it's a 50-50 split with Kamala breaking the tie. Because I think if the Republicans took one of those seats, it guaranteed that we could have gridlock. Anyway, long story long. The 2 senators would kind of break that for DC, assuming that they would be Democrats and stuff like that. And so now all of a sudden the Senate, even like Senate Republicans would look at it and say, well, now I can't, it's harder to get past the filibuster for us. If we want, that's 2 more seats that we're probably not going to win. So it's scary. It looks like, I was talking to my brother about this the other day. It looks like kind of like the Civil War time, right? When we are doing those compromises, we'll bring Missouri in, but we have to bring in, Maine, right? To like even out the balance of power, right? We're not talking slave states and free states. We're talking Republicans and Democrats. And I feel like that's the biggest thing. They'll want something where Republicans can guarantee themselves leverage back against something else. So it's one of those ones where, like, when you look at this politically, it's messy and gross. But when you just look at it on the basis of the Constitution, right, there's no reason Washington, D.C. should not be a state. These are people that are not getting the deal that the Constitution provides.
One of the other counter arguments, too, is that why don't they just use retrocession and give that part of DC back to Maryland, which I think those people would say that they've been a separate entity for so long. They have different desires and wants, and it's a different political climate than Maryland. And Maryland might not necessarily say, I'm trying to think, we want that many more, they might not want that voter population in their state necessarily. Like, it's weird because like Virginia is kind of like 50-50 right now.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say Maryland's a little bit more conservative, but all you Marylanders out there, don't jump up my chimney about that. So you were right. It was a 50-50 split. There's 2 independents, 48 Dems, 50 Republicans, and then Kamala would be the tiebreaker as the vice president.
Yeah.
But
that's
still,
because they had to win Georgia. So.
But still, it's not, you don't have that super majority.
Right.
Like you were talking about.
The 60 votes that you really need to win. Referencing Maryland, Maryland's 10 electoral votes in the 2020 election went for Joseph R. Biden. So I think they're kind of, usually that upper East Coast area, and I know they're technically in the South, but because of the Civil War era, stuff like that. But I think they tend to lean more to the left than the right, but I could be wrong. So
it's hard to say right now. I would say the political landscape in America is kind of,
yeah, which is again like the hopeful goal of everybody getting tuned down and stuff like that. But this is just when you look at it and if you look at this on the level of if you lived in DC and you were trying to pass laws for your own entity and Congress shut them down, people who weren't from your area got to shut them down. You could obviously be visibly upset by this. And then the taxation without representation is huge. They get a representative, but they can't vote, so they have no voice in government. So,
well, I think it's especially interesting coming out of the COVID, or as we deal with COVID still, and a lot of decisions are being left at the state level. That means the federal government's making decisions again for DC.
Yep.
Where, I mean, even we've not had a legislative branch that's been 92% Democrat. So even when we have a Democratic majority in the legislative branch, it's still not an accurate depiction of the political climate, right, of the people of the District of Columbia, which they would say, what was it? They were going to rename it the State of Washington Douglas Commonwealth. Yeah. So that way it's still Washington, D.C., because at one point somebody was saying call it New Washington.
They said New Columbia, I think was
New Columbia. That's what it was.
The original passing of it, which surprises me because I don't know why Columbia. So
I feel like there's some kind of tie that.
Because all I think about the Columbia is I think of the steamship. So Robert, what was his name?
Robert Gray.
Thank you.
That's where my daughter goes to school.
Oh, there you go. That'll help.
Home of the Explorers.
Good name for him.
Anchors Away.
Heyo.
I want to say that Columbia is like this, almost kind of in the same way like the Statue of Liberty is like Libertas. I think Columbia is like one of those, again, like feminine embodiments of like high American ideals kind of a deal, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I guess it's the District of Columbia, so New Columbia would make sense. I didn't even think about that. Because Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia is what they chose, so
it's technically Columbia, not Colombia, but Columbia.
Yeah. So, anyway, quick talks tonight. Bark, anything to add on that one?
No, I'll mind my P's and Q's tonight.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, hope you enjoyed this one. Again, Washington, D.C., keep an eye on it. The big thing is it did pass the House of Representatives with no Republican votes. It passed just on Democratic Party lines. However, the thought is to get this to a vote that in the Senate, it would need to pass the filibuster, which is a 60-vote majority. And it does not look like there will be 10 Republicans who will agree to this. Again, just because, in my personal opinion, I think it would upset the apple cart in terms of the ballots of power in the Senate. And so they are not interested. Republicans at the moment are probably not interested in doing that. I would say that Democrats would probably shut it down if they were a more conservative group as well. Everybody wants a little bit more power and stuff like that. So I'll throw out my personal opinion. Washington, D.C. needs to become a state because those 700,000 people need to get representation. I think that's only fair. Bark, what do you think?
On a strictly nonpartisan ticket, I would say yes. Like, I find it highly hypocritical that the seat of the federal government is where people have the least kind of autonomy over their own decisions.
Yep.
But I also understand the reality of American politics, and that's why the Democratic Party is pushing this so hard right now, is because it behooves them, because it's 3 more votes for them, 2 more votes in the Senate, which gives them the majority. So it's really self-serving, though. It's hard to sit there and they're going to play it like they're doing it for the reasons like we've talked about, when in reality it goes back to party politics where it helps them get closer to being able to kind of like run the show without having to have bipartisanism, which is really what this whole system's supposed to be about, is coming together and compromising and right. You know.
And one of the things my brother brought this up, and I thought it was a really interesting point, and we tend to not agree on what we think about in politics, but my brother brought this up, and I think it matches what you just said, where I do honestly think that we need each other. We need people that think conservatively. We need people that think liberally, because if everyone thought liberally, we would be out on this wing, and we don't know what would happen, right? The conservative people kind of bring back a lot of people, right? Whereas the liberal people bring out the new ideas and the new waves of everything like that and pull those conservative people back. So that's just I thought it was an interesting point to talk about. So until next time, I'm the Turn.
I'm the Bark.
And we're going to be here a long time. Have a good night, everybody.
Be safe.
And be well.
There must be balance to the Force.